They were legends, brilliant black stars who didn't just entertain the world but defined entire eras. Their talent was unmatched, their presence unforgettable. Yet behind the fame, the applause, and the glittering spotlight, a darker battle raged. Fame placed them on the highest pedestal, but also pushed them into a storm of pressure, temptation, and silent suffering. Their sudden deaths didn't just end promising journeys, they ripped holes in the hearts of millions who adored them. Today, we're taking you on a haunting and powerful journey into the lives of 20 black celebrities whose bright flames were extinguished far too soon by drug overdoses. They were icons at their peak, shaping culture and capturing the world. But behind the glamour were wounds the public never saw. Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind their rise, their pain, and the devastating end that shocked the world. 1. David Ruffin. David Ruffin, the troubled genius, the unmatched voice, the legend who soared higher than most, but fell harder than anyone expected. To millions, he was the sound of the Temptations. When he stepped up to the mic on My Girl, his voice didn't just sing the words. It wrapped around people's hearts, warm and powerful, a soul-deep cry that only he could deliver. But the same spotlight that made him immortal slowly pushed him toward the shadows. After he left the Temptations in 1968, fans waited for Ruffin to rise even higher. Instead, disappointment and pressure tightened around him like a vice. Cocaine became both his escape and his prison, dragging him deeper into a darkness he could never quite outrun. On the night of May 31, 1991, after performing at a small show that hinted at the brilliance he once commanded, Ruffin found himself in a shabby apartment notorious for drug use. Cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air, empty beer bottles rattled underfoot. One deep inhale of cocaine, and everything spiraled. His heart jolted violently. His breath thinned. Sweat soaked his clothes. Suddenly, the room erupted into chaos. Those around him panicked. They carried him to a car, sped to the hospital, then abandoned him in the emergency room lobby like a discarded memory. No name, no explanation, no hand to hold. By the time staff discovered him, David Ruffin was gone. A golden voice silenced. A legend left alone in the cold. A tragic ending to one of Motown's brightest flames. 2. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway, a soulful genius slowly swallowed by a storm no one else could see. To the world, Donny wasn't just a singer, he was a revelation. His voice, warm as velvet and aching with truth, turned songs like A Song for You and Where Is the Love into timeless treasures. Music critics called him one of the most extraordinary vocalists of the 1970s, a man whose every note felt like a prayer. But behind that heavenly sound lived a man trapped in a silent battle far darker than fame, pressure, or heartbreak. Donny suffered from schizophrenia, a ruthless illness that twisted his reality. Paranoia stalked him day and night. He believed unseen forces were invading his thoughts, altering his mind, shadowing his every move. Conversations felt dangerous, rooms felt wired. Even in the presence of loved ones, he often felt terrifyingly alone. His brilliance became tangled with fear. On January 13, 1979, Donny checked into the Essex House Hotel in New York City. He was working with Roberta Flack on what should have been his grand return, a comeback album that many believed would remind the world of his unmatched genius. For a moment, there was hope. But inside his hotel room, that fragile hope shattered, the hallucinations surged with unbearable intensity. Though he took his prescribed medication, it often dulled his spirit more than it eased his torment. Sometime during that long, agonizing night, Donny reached a point of no return. Overwhelmed by a mind at war with itself, he stepped toward an irreversible choice. In the early morning hours, hotel staff discovered the devastating aftermath just outside the building. The news spread like wildfire, shocking musicians, fans, and an entire generation that had been shaped by his sound. Donny Hathaway was only 33 years old. an age when most artists are still discovering their fullest potential. His voice should have soared for decades. Instead, it was silenced not by scandal, not by decline, but by a merciless mental illness that too often remains hidden behind closed doors. His story ended on a cold New York sidewalk, but his legacy, it lives on, haunting, beautiful, and eternal, a reminder that even the brightest souls can be dimmed by battles the world never sees. 3. Prince. Prince wasn't merely a musician, he was lightning in human form. A visionary, a rebel, a purple-clad magician who bent genres, rules, and expectations with a single note. When Purple Rain hit the world, it didn't just make him a superstar, it turned him into a symbol of black brilliance, artistic freedom, and pure, unfiltered genius. But behind the blinding lights, electrifying concerts, and mythic aura, stood a man quietly breaking beneath the weight of his own legend. On the morning of April 21, 2016, the elevator doors at Paisley Park slid open, and time seemed to freeze. Prince lay motionless on the hard, cold floor, his skin pale, his body still, one hand curled against his chest, as if gripping a final wave of unimaginable pain. In that silent metal box, the most vibrant performer of his generation took his last breath, and the world shifted. But this tragedy hadn't struck out of nowhere. It had been building slowly, silently. Years, decades, of high-energy shows, splits, spins, and jumps in towering heels had torn apart his hips. Doctors begged him to get replacement surgery. But Prince, devoted to his beliefs as a Jehovah's Witness, refused. The required blood transfusion went against his faith. So he performed through agony, numbing the pain with pills that kept him moving, glowing, and unstoppable until they didn't. The truth came later, cold and merciless. The toxicology report revealed the pill that ended his life wasn't what he thought. It was laced with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid so powerful that even a few grains can kill, a counterfeit, a silent assassin. No one knows whether Prince ever realized he had taken a deadly dose. And just like that, the fire dimmed. A legend vanished. The music fell quiet, leaving behind a silence as heavy as grief and a legacy that will never fade. 4. Ike Turner. Ike Turner wasn't just part of rock and roll history, he helped ignite it. Rocket 88, the track many historians regard as one of the very first rock and roll records, carried his fingerprints all over it. He was a visionary, a musical architect whose rhythm, attitude, and raw energy shaped the foundation of an entire genre. But brilliance often walks side by side with darkness, and Ike's life became a storm of contradictions, genius tangled with chaos, innovation shadowed by scandal, and success built on fractured personal battles. In the final days of his life, something inside him shifted. Those close to him whispered that Ike seemed unsettled, almost haunted. He told his assistant he felt as though a shadow hovered nearby, an omen he couldn't explain. A chilling sense of inevitability hung over him. On the morning of December 12, 2007, that feeling became reality. Inside his quiet San Marcos home, his assistant entered the living room to review the day's schedule. At first, the scene looked ordinary. Ike sitting upright on his favorite sofa, one hand resting gently on his lap, his expression strangely serene. It seemed like he had simply drifted into a light nap, but as she drew closer, the truth came like ice. Ike Turner was gone. No struggle, no sound, just a quiet departure after a life filled with noise. Later reports confirmed what many feared: his death was tied to the long-term consequences of substance abuse, the same demons he had battled for decades. And so, in the same house where he had tasted both triumph and torment, Ike Turner slipped into eternity. A man whose music once roared like thunder met a final haunting silence, a lonely ending to one of rock and roll's most turbulent lives. 5. Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman, the quiet storm, the unforgettable voice, the woman whose pain whispered louder than applause ever could. To the world, she was elegance personified, a statuesque soul and raw and bug goddess with a voice that wrapped itself around your heart, warm, sorrowful, powerful, utterly consuming. When Phyllis sang, you didn't just hear her, you felt her. Every note carried a lifetime of longing, beauty, and bruised hope. But the brighter her star burned on stage, the lonelier she became when the lights went out. By the summer of 1995, the storm inside her was reaching its breaking point. On June 30th, hours before she was meant to step onto a stage and mesmerize a crowd once more, Phyllis lay quietly in her Manhattan apartment, a room draped in silk curtains, soft light, and the echoes of dreams she fought so hard to hold on to. Beside her were two silent witnesses, an empty wine bottle and a container of medication, its weight chilling in its implication. The world was not ready for the truth that room revealed. What made the tragedy even more devastating was how perfectly she hid her pain. That very day, friends saw her smiling, laughing, even joking, her radiant smile giving no clue that her heart had reached its final breaking point. She had mastered the art of appearing fine, even when her soul felt hollow. But earlier that afternoon, everything shifted. As she prepared for the evening's performance, Phyllis received a phone call, one she had been hoping for, perhaps even depending on. A spark lit in her eyes when she saw the number, but the voice on the other end delivered a final blow she never expected. "Phyllis, it's over. This will be the last time I call you. Please don't reach out again." A soft click, silence, and then something inside her went dark. It wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the shattering of one of the last emotional threads she had been holding on to. After the call, she moved through her apartment like a ghost drifting through memories. Instead of rehearsing, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat alone in the fading afternoon light, replaying a lifetime of triumphs shadowed by silent suffering. Days later, when friends who grew worried came to check on her, they discovered a letter resting near her still, graceful form. Written in her elegant hand, it revealed years of buried anguish, heartbreak, and the crushing weight of a loneliness fame could never touch. The world lost more than a singer that day. It lost a soul who sang her truth even when her own heart was breaking. Phyllis Hyman left behind music filled with fire, tenderness, and pain, and a haunting reminder that even the brightest, most beautiful stars can fade when no one sees the darkness consuming them. 6. Frankie Lymon. Frankie Lymon, the angel-voiced prodigy whose final moments were as heartbreaking as his rise, was meteoric. In the mid-1950s, he wasn't just a teen idol, he was a revolution wrapped in a boy's body. At only 13 years old, Frankie stepped onto the national stage with a voice so pure, so effortlessly magical, that it felt almost unreal. Why Do Fools Fall in Love didn't just top charts, it electrified America. Overnight, Frankie became the bright-eyed prince of doo-wop, a whirlwind of charm who made girls scream and critics marvel. But fame, especially when handed to a child, is a fragile blessing. As Frankie grew, his voice deepened, shedding the angelic tone that had made him a star. Hollywood, always hungry for the next novelty, let him slip through its fingers. The applause died down. Offers dried up, and the boy who once had the world at his feet suddenly found himself standing alone in the ruins of a childhood stolen by fame. In desperation, Frankie reached for a different kind of escape: heroin, a poison that wrapped around him slowly at first, then tightened like a vise. He tried to break free. At times, he managed to pull himself together. But addiction is a ruthless captor, and Frankie's young heart never fully escaped its grasp. Still, hope wasn't gone. On February 26, 1968, Frankie walked into his grandmother's Harlem home, the place where he first sang, first dreamed, first tasted joy. He wasn't just visiting, he was at the edge of a comeback. A new record deal had been signed. A producer believed in him again. For the first time in years, Frankie Lyman felt the spark of possibility. He was 25, still young enough to rise, still talented enough to reclaim everything he had lost. But old demons have long memories. That night, perhaps thinking he was stronger than before, perhaps believing just once wouldn't hurt, Frankie returned to the drug that had destroyed so much of his youth. Maybe he wanted calm. Maybe he wanted confidence. Maybe he wanted to forget the pressure waiting for him tomorrow. But his body, battered by years of addiction, couldn't take it anymore. By morning, the house was silent. A quiet so heavy, it seemed to swallow the walls. Frankie was found lifeless on the floor. The same boy who had once made the world dance, now gone in a heartbeat. News spread like wildfire. Fans wept. Critics mourned. The industry froze. Frankie Lyman died at 25, just when he was ready to write a new chapter. His voice, once a beacon of youthful joy, became a haunting reminder of how violently dreams can collapse under the weight of fame and addiction. He should have soared. He should have lived. Instead, the world was left with a question that still aches today. What might Frankie Lyman have become if he had been allowed to grow up? 7. Shock G. Shock G, the masked genius, the eccentric architect of digital underground, and a soul who left the world far too quietly. To most, he was the playful voice behind the Humpty Dance, the musical shapeshifter who blended funk with hip-hop long before it was cool. But beneath the humor, the alter egos, and the wild creativity was Gregory Edward Jacobs, a deeply sensitive artist who saw music as a world without walls. He wasn't just a rapper, he was a composer, a producer, a visionary who opened doors for an entire generation, including a young Tupac Shakur. But time is unkind to pioneers. As the golden age of hip-hop faded, the spotlight that once followed Shock G began to dim. The fame, the camaraderie, the wild tours, they slowly drifted into memory, and in their place came long nights, loneliness, and a growing battle with addiction. He wandered through life like a man caught between eras, haunted by the brilliance of his past and the emptiness that followed it. On the night of April 21, 2021, in a quiet Tampa hotel room, the weight of those years pressed down on him once more. Maybe he wanted calm. Maybe he wanted silence. Maybe he just wanted to forget. Whatever the reason, he mixed alcohol with other substances, a dangerous cocktail his body, weary from years of struggle, could no longer fight. His heartbeat staggered, his breathing slowed, and then, nothing. By morning, housekeeping opened the door to a room far too still. Shock Dead lay lifeless, the vibrant creator reduced to a devastating silence. When the toxicology report arrived, it confirmed the truth: a lethal mix of substances had taken him away. The news spread across the hip-hop world like a cold shockwave. Fans mourned. Artists paid tribute. Old-school legends bowed their heads. Shock G's physical journey ended that morning, but his legacy didn't. His fingerprints remain in every experimental beat, every funk-infused rap track, every artist bold enough to be weird, wild, and unapologetically original. And somewhere beyond the pain, beyond the addictions and the shadows, you can almost imagine him grinning behind the Humpty nose, crafting new rhythms in a place where the music never dies. 8. Gerald Levert. Gerald Levert wasn't just an R&B singer, he was a force of nature, a velvet-voiced powerhouse whose rich, emotional delivery could melt tension, lift spirits, and make even the coldest heart feel something. With classics like Casanova and Baby Hold On to Me, Gerald didn't just create hits, he created memories, the kind people still hum decades later. On stage, he was fire and elegance combined. Off stage, he was known for his kindness, humility, and devotion to family. But beneath the spotlight and the applause, Gerald was fighting a private battle. Years of performing, traveling, and pushing through physical strain had left him living with constant pain. And on the night of November 9, 2006, he told his family something he rarely confessed. He felt tightness in his chest, and each breath seemed harder than the last. He planned to see a doctor soon, but the next sunrise never came for him. The following morning, Gerald was found unresponsive in his bed at his home in Ohio. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but the golden voice of R&B had already gone silent. When the medical examiner's report was released, the truth stunned fans everywhere. Gerald Levert died from respiratory failure caused by an accidental overdose of prescription pain medication, pills he relied on simply to get through each day. His departure wasn't just a loss, it was a wound for an entire generation of music lovers. At only 40 years old, at the height of his brilliance, Gerald slipped away quietly, leaving behind an unforgettable legacy, a grieving industry, and a silence that still feels heavy today. His voice may be gone, but the soul he poured into the world continues to echo, timeless and irreplaceable. 9. Rick James. Rick James wasn't just a musician, he was a natural disaster wrapped in leather and glitter, a wild, explosive force who didn't simply make funk, he redefined it. When Rick hit the stage, the lights seemed brighter, the bass felt heavier, and fans felt something they couldn't explain. A rush, a spark, a shockwave of pure musical rebellion. With global anthems like Super Freak and Give It To Me Baby, he didn't just entertain, he stamped his personality onto an entire generation. But the bigger the legend grew, the heavier the burden behind it. Beneath the outrageous persona, the braids, the boots, the bravado, was a man wrestling with pressure, pain, and demons he never managed to outrun. Fame had a cruel way of pushing Rick into extremes. It demanded more than applause. It demanded pieces of him, and in private those pieces were paid with sleepless nights, old injuries, and the kind of emotional exhaustion no crowd ever saw. By the early 2000s, Rick James was fighting a quiet war against chronic pain. The years of touring, partying, and pushing his body past its limits had carved deep physical scars. He used substances not for thrills anymore, but for survival, to stay awake in the studio, to silence the pain that followed him everywhere, to keep up with a world that never slowed down. On August 5, 2004, Rick spent hours in the studio working on what he hoped would be the next phase of his musical rebirth. He laughed, he created, he dreamed, the way he always did when music filled his veins. But when he returned to his room that night, the familiar routine followed. A handful of substances, a moment of relief, a temporary escape. Except this time, his body was too tired. Sometime during those late hours, Rick James collapsed. Maybe he felt his strength slipping. Maybe he drifted off unaware. No one knows, but when his assistant entered the room the next morning, the man who had once set stages on fire lay still. The room was silent, hauntingly, painfully silent. The coroner's report later revealed 9 different substances in his system. Not a deliberate choice, not a final act, just a tragic collision of years of pain, old habits, and a body that couldn't keep fighting. Rick James died at 56, leaving behind a silence funk wasn't ready for. Yet his legacy refuses to fade. His fire still burns in every heavy bass line, every bold groove, every dance floor that comes alive the moment his music plays. Rick James may be gone, but funk will forever carry his heartbeat. 10. Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix, the guitar god whose final night mixed tenderness, confusion, and tragedy. He wasn't just a musician, he was a seismic event, a cosmic force who turned rock on its head with Purple Haze, Voodoo Child, and solos that seemed to tear open the sky. On stage, he was untouchable, fire, fury, and magic woven into every note. But off stage, beneath the myth and the brilliance, lived a man far more delicate than the world ever realized. September 18, 1970, began like a rare breath of calm. Inside a quiet room at the Samarkand Hotel in London, Jimmy spent the night with his girlfriend, Monica Danneman, talking softly, sipping wine, listening to records. For once, the whirlwind paused. There were no crowds, no cameras, no chaos. Just two people in a dimly lit room, trying to hold on to something real. But by dawn, everything had changed. Monica woke to find Jimmy gasping for air, unresponsive, his body overwhelmed. Panic surged. She called for an ambulance, but precious time slipped away. By the time Jimmy arrived at St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, the world's greatest guitarist, the man who made instruments cry, scream, and soar, was gone. The official cause of death was brutal in its simplicity: respiratory failure triggered by a dangerous mix of sleeping pills and alcohol. He was only 27, an age far too young for a legend whose sound felt limitless. The news shattered the music world. Fans wept, artists mourned, a generation felt the ground shift beneath them. Jimi Hendrix left behind more than songs. He left behind an energy, a spirit, a sonic fire that still blazes today. His life may have ended in silence, but his guitar, it never stopped echoing. Heavy D. Heavy D wasn't just a rapper, he was the heartbeat of 90s hip-hop, a pioneer with irresistible charm, infectious confidence, and a smile that could light up a stage before he even touched the mic. With hits like Now That We Found Love, he brought joy, energy, and movement to a genre often defined by grit. Heavy D made hip-hop feel good, and millions around the world felt that warmth every time his voice came through their speakers. But even legends aren't immune to life's sudden turns. On November 8, 2011, after a long flight home from London, Heavy D walked through his California door, feeling unusually tired, shortness of breath, chest discomfort, symptoms he brushed off as nothing more than jet lag. For a man used to busy schedules, long flights, and non-stop creativity, fatigue didn't seem dangerous, just another part of the grind. But fate had other plans. Hours later, as he stood at his doorstep, Heavy D suddenly stumbled forward and collapsed. No warning, no time to reach out. Just a devastating fall witnessed by a quick-thinking neighbor who immediately called 911. When paramedics arrived, Heavy D was conscious, but barely. His condition was deteriorating by the minute. Rushed to Cedars Sinai Medical Center, he fought as doctors worked urgently to save him. But less than an hour after arriving, the unimaginable became reality. Heavy D was gone. A pulmonary embolism, a blood clot obstructing blood flow to his lungs, had taken his life. Medical reports later suggested that an anti-inflammatory medication he was using may have worsened the silent danger growing inside him. At only 44, his death shook the hip-hop community to its core. This wasn't just the loss of an artist, it was the loss of a cultural torchbearer, a man who spread positivity in an industry that desperately needed it. Heavy D left behind a legacy of joy, rhythm, and groundbreaking influence, and a reminder of how fragile even the brightest lives can be. 2. Ray Charles. Ray Charles wasn't just a music icon. He was the beating heart of soul, a pioneering force who blended gospel, blues, and jazz into a sound so powerful it reshaped American music forever. With timeless classics like Georgia on My Mind and Hit the Road Jack, he didn't just perform, he reached into the human spirit, pulled out raw emotion, and turned it into melody. But behind the brilliance, Ray fought a private war that nearly consumed him. For decades, addiction cast a heavy shadow over his success. It stalked him through tours, recording sessions, and lonely hotel rooms, threatening to silence the genius the world adored. Though Ray finally overcame his addiction in 1965, the years of damage lingered beneath the surface. His body paid the price long after his spirit broke free. On June 10, 2004, inside his Beverly Hills home, Ray Charles took his final breath. He was 73. His death marked more than the end of a legendary career. It was the closing of a chapter in musical history. Chronic liver disease, the lasting consequence of earlier struggles, had slowly weakened him. Yet Ray met the decline with the same quiet strength that had defined his life. He had survived blindness, poverty, racism, and addiction, rising from adversity to become a voice that transcended generations. When the news of his passing spread, fans and musicians around the world felt the weight of the loss. They weren't just mourning a performer, they were honoring a man who transformed pain into poetry and hardship into harmony. Ray Charles's journey was one of triumph forged through suffering, a reminder that even the greatest among us carry invisible battles, and though he is gone, his legacy still sings, rich, soulful, eternal. 13. Ol' Dirty Bastard, ODB. Old Dirty Bastard wasn't just a rapper, he was hip-hop's wild lightning bolt. The Wu-Tang Clan's most unpredictable member, ODB embodied chaos, genius, and raw emotion in a way no one before or after him ever could. His delivery was wild, his persona unfiltered, and his presence impossible to ignore. He didn't follow rules, he shattered them, rebuilding hip-hop in his own eccentric image. But beneath the outrageous antics and rebellious character was a man carrying heavy shadows, a man whose brilliance burned so fiercely it threatened to consume him. And in the end, it did. On November 13, 2004, just 2 days before his 36th birthday, ODB suddenly collapsed inside a New York recording studio. Witnesses watched in horror as he gasped for breath, his energy drained, his speech slipping into incoherent murmurs. Within moments, he lost consciousness. Paramedics rushed in, but their efforts were no match for the damage already done. Old Dirty Bastard was gone. The official cause, acute heart failure, brought on by a lethal mix of substances that had worn down his body for years. It was a devastating, heartbreaking end to a life lived at full intensity. His death sent shockwaves through hip-hop. ODB wasn't just an artist. He was a force of nature, a symbol of freedom, originality, and fearless creativity. His influence shaped an entire generation, and his absence left a void no one has ever filled. Though he left this world too soon, his wild spirit lives on, forever echoing through the music, culture, and legend he helped create. 14. Little Willie John. Little Willie John wasn't just a singer, he was one of soul music's earliest flames, a voice so powerful and emotional it could stop listeners in their tracks. With his timeless hit Fever, he helped shape the foundation of R&B, delivering vocals that were sharp, elegant, and unforgettable. But behind the polished sound and rising fame was a man whose life veered into darkness long before the world realized what was happening. On May 26, 1968, at only 30 years old, Little Willie John died inside a Washington state prison. The official cause was listed as pneumonia, yet the circumstances surrounding his death have fueled whispers for decades. Some say his health had been slipping for years, worn down by personal struggles and the unforgiving conditions of prison life. Others quietly wondered whether mistreatment played a role, though no concrete evidence ever emerged. What remained was a mystery, and a silence that felt far too heavy for someone whose voice had once soared across the nation. His passing was quiet, almost hidden, a stark contrast to the brilliance he brought to American music. But tragedy could not erase his influence. Though his final years were filled with pain, isolation, and unanswered questions, his legacy survived. Little Willie John may have taken his last breath behind bars, but his voice, fiery, tender, and unmistakably soulful, lives on, echoing through generations who still feel the power of the man behind the music. 15. Charlie Parker. Charlie Parker, the world called him Bird, but he was far more than a nickname or a musician. He was a revolution in human form, a visionary saxophonist whose sound ripped open the boundaries of jazz and built the very foundation of bebop. When Parker played, his notes didn't simply fill the room, they challenged it, lifted it, reshaped it. His music carried truths too heavy for words, transforming pain into beauty, chaos into genius. But while his artistry seemed untouchable, his life behind the spotlight was filled with shadows. On March 12, 1955, Bird's extraordinary journey came to an end in the Manhattan apartment of Baroness Panonica de Koenigswarter, a loyal friend and guardian angel to many jazz legends. When help arrived, Parker was already in a deep coma. His body was so ravaged by years of addiction, illness, and relentless living that the medical examiner misjudged his age by almost 2 decades. Though they estimated he was over 50, Charlie Parker was just 34. The official cause of death was heart failure and pneumonia, the final consequences of the brutal battles he had endured for most of his life. In his last days, he could barely stand, racked by violent coughing fits, his frail frame struggling to hold the immense spirit within. For those who knew him, the tragedy felt inevitable, but that didn't soften the blow. Jazz lost one of its greatest innovators far too soon. Bird left behind unfinished melodies, unwritten solos, and visions of sound the world would never get to hear. Yet his legacy didn't die on that sofa. Charlie Parker's fearless creativity still resonates in every club, every musician, every daring improvisation. His voice continues to echo through time, reminding us that genius, even when born of suffering, can transform the world forever. 16. Michael Kenneth Williams. The sudden death of Michael Kenneth Williams sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Widely celebrated as one of the most extraordinary actors of his time, Williams didn't just play roles, he inhabited them. His portrayal of Omar Little in The Wire wasn't merely iconic, it redefined what a television character could be. Raw, complex, unforgettable, just like the man himself. Yet behind the applause, behind the layered performances, was a soul fighting battles the world rarely saw. On September 6, 2021, that silent struggle reached its heartbreaking end. Williams was discovered in his Brooklyn apartment, the lights still glowing, the television murmuring softly, as if waiting for him to return. But the vibrant presence that once commanded the screen had faded. There were no signs of chaos, no final cry for help, only a heavy, haunting stillness. The official cause, an accidental overdose, a tragic end to a long private war waged far from red carpets and cameras. It was a harsh reminder that even the strongest faces can hide the deepest wounds. Michael K. Williams' passing was more than a headline. It was a profound loss for storytelling itself. His performances were fearless, emotional, and achingly human. Though he is gone, his legacy lives on in every scene he ever touched. Through his art, his truth still speaks, powerful, honest, and impossible to forget. 17. Pimp C. Pimp C wasn't just a rapper, he was the heartbeat of Southern hip-hop. As one half of UGK, he fused gritty street narratives with blues-soaked melodies, creating a sound that forever changed the culture. His voice was unmistakable, his presence electric, and his influence undeniable. But behind the confident swagger and iconic music was a man carrying battles few ever saw. On December 4, 2007, the world lost that unmistakable voice. Hotel staff in Los Angeles entered his room and found him lying calmly on his bed as if resting after a long day. But Pimp C had been gone for hours. The truth was devastating. Respiratory failure brought on by a codeine overdose, the same substance he had struggled with throughout his career. His sleep apnea, a condition he had long dealt with, made the situation even more fatal. Those closest to him had always feared this possibility, but knowing didn't make the loss any easier. At just 33 years old, Pimp C's passing sent a deep tremor through the hip-hop world. His voice may have fallen silent, but his legacy remains unshakable. Pimp A lives on in every beat, every verse, and every Southern artist who still carries the spirit of the underground king. 18. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday wasn't just a jazz singer. She was the fragile, fearless voice of American pain. Every note she sang carried bruises, memories, and truth. Her haunting performance of Strange Fruit didn't just protest racism, it exposed it, trembling with sorrow and defiance. But the brilliance the world adored came from a life filled with wounds that never fully healed. On July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday took her last breath in a New York hospital. She was only 44, her body weakened by liver disease and years of struggle. Instead of comfort, she spent her final days under police guard, watched like a criminal rather than cared for as a dying woman. A small packet of narcotics had been found near her bed, and compassion was replaced with handcuffs. She was literally shackled as her life slipped away. As her condition worsened, hope faded. Her breath grew thin, her once luminous eyes dulled, and the room around her remained cold and unwelcoming. She died alone, guarded, denied the dignity she deserved. A tragic ending for a woman who had given the world so much emotional truth. Yet Billie Holiday's spirit didn't die in that hospital room. Her voice still drifts through time, raw, aching, unforgettable. In every trembling lyric, she carries the weight of her battles and the fire of her resilience. And through her music, Lady Day lives on, forever telling the world a story it must never forget. 19. Dinah Washington. Dinah Washington wasn't just the queen of the blues, she was a force of nature. With a voice that could glide from velvet warmth to piercing power in a single breath, she left audiences breathless across the world. Her unforgettable performances of What a Difference a Day Makes and Unforgettable didn't simply entertain, they defined eras, cementing her as one of the most captivating vocalists in jazz and blues history. But even a queen is not spared from heartbreak. On December 14, 1963, tragedy struck. Dinah Washington was found unresponsive in her Detroit bedroom by her husband. The room was still, dimly lit, and hauntingly peaceful, a frozen moment that spoke louder than any scream. On the nightstand lay quiet clues, a few empty glasses, pill bottles, reminders of a restless night. The evening before, Dinah had mixed alcohol with a widely used stimulant, a dangerous combination few understood, especially for someone whose heart and spirit had endured years of relentless pressure. When her husband attempted to wake her, he found only silence where her bright laughter used to be. Dinah Washington, at just 39 years old, was gone. Her sudden death rippled through the music world, stealing away a voice that had illuminated the grandest stages and shaped generations of artists. Yet while her life ended far too soon, her legacy refuses to fade. Dinah's voice, rich, soulful, unapologetically powerful, continues to echo through time. She may have left this world in a whisper, but her music endures as a timeless roar, ensuring the Queen of the Blues will never be forgotten. 20. Marvin Sease. Marvin Sease, the king of dirty blues, the unapologetic storyteller of Southern R&B, was more than just a performer. He was a wildfire. With a voice that thundered through juke joints and concert halls alike, Marvin delivered music that was raw, emotional, and unmistakably his. His stage presence alone could command a room, but it was the truth in his voice, the heartbreak, the grit, the longing, that made him a legend across the South. But even the fiercest voices eventually meet silence. On February 8, 2011, Marvin Sease passed away in his home in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Pneumonia had taken hold of his body, and in those final days, the decline was impossible to ignore. The booming baritone that once shook walls had grown thin, his breath shallow, his energy fading. Show after show had to be canceled, not for lack of passion, but because his body could no longer carry him. Family members recalled how he struggled with a relentless cough, fighting to breathe, brushing off doctor visits until it was too late. The official cause was listed as complications from pneumonia, but not everyone accepted that as the full story. Those who knew him whispered about the battles he fought long before illness struck, years of emotional hardship, personal loss, and the lingering effects of past drug use. These struggles, they believed, had weakened him from the inside out, leaving his immune system too fragile to withstand a final blow. The pain Marvin poured into his music wasn't theatrical. It was lived. Every moan, every lyric, every gravelly note carried pieces of his journey, his mistakes, his triumphs, and his wounds. And perhaps, in the end, those wounds took more from him than the world ever realized. His passing left a painful void in the Southern R&B community. Marvin Sease wasn't simply a singer, he was a truth-teller, a provocateur, a man who sang life exactly as he felt it. Though he is gone, the legacy he carved, bold, emotional, and deeply human, continues to echo through every stage he once set on fire. And that brings us to the end of another heartbreaking chapter in music history, a reminder that behind the glitter of stardom lies a world filled with pressure, loneliness, and silent battles. These losses are not just news stories. They are echoes of dreams cut short and voices silenced too soon. Which story stayed with you the longest? Which loss still hurts to remember? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your reflections help keep their memories alive. If this video moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. More untold tragedies, hidden truths, and emotional journeys are coming your way. Stay tuned. The next story might change the way you see fame forever.